today's conversation is more of an introduction to the panelists on this podcast, because we've been opinionated on two very specific issues over the course of the last 2 weeks, but this is more of an introduction to our belief system as it pertains relates to common civics issues that are pretty popular in as far as debates, here in the United States. So we're going to be hitting on I think we've got 11 topics right now, 10 or 11 topics. Math is hard, but we will give about a 1-minute synopsis or less of where we stand on that specific issue, and then we'll just keep going around, rapid fire style. And our first topic, which is very broad, is war. And since I picked the topic, I'll start the discussion with war. So I firmly believe in the utility of war. I can look through history and find where war was the right move on multiple occasions. I can't say that that's been true recently. And our recent conflicts here that we've been involved with here as Americans I don't sit well with me in most cases. I firmly believe that Saddam Hussein should have been removed from power, as he was cancer on his people. But the way that we went about it and the reasons why we went about it kind of defeated the purpose, because we created other problems in that region. That's my feelings on war. Ethan?
All right. It's similar that there have been just wars, and there have been effective wars that achieve the goals of their nations. And those don't always overlap. But those are both examples of wars that are at least smart. Even if they're not good, they're smart. And one nation went out and took something and it got it. And then there's how we've done war in the last 50 years, which is we go out and we get ourselves in trouble, and then eventually we stop spending money and blood, and we give up. And yeah, let's stop doing that. I do agree that war has utility, and it has utility as an option when you're in pre-war situation. Knowing that it is an option is vital in foreign affairs. I feel like the U.S. has gotten itself into wars it didn't need to be in because of our disrespect of nations. And what I mean is, we don't treat them like grown-ups. We are fairly exploitative towards them, and in fact, our nation has helped our businesses exploit other countries, and has been involved in economically exploiting them, or politically exploiting them, and carrying on proxy wars and so forth with other powers. And when you do that, you don't build stable nations. You don't help people build their own stable nations, and that's really how you ultimately avoid war, is you have grown-up relationships between stable nations.
Peter?
I think we're all fairly in agreement on this. I think the way I would probably vocalize that is to say that I think that war can be utilitarian, but we have to examine it and look at, is the evil we're going to subdue worse than the evil we're going to create? And I don't think we've done that at any time in the last 50 years. World War II, I think, was probably the last example I would really lean to. And I think we use communism as an evil to get into war, but that's a really vague thing. That's an ideology, not, Jews are being exterminated or whatever. And so I think that's a balance and a weighing that we should have to do.
All right, I guess I'm going to take a controversial position here. I thought Peter might help me out here and tee me up a bit, but I fully. So my background is Christian, or my background on this is coming into this with a Christian viewpoint, and I understand that many other Christians subscribe to just war theory, and I can see the quotes utility of war. However, I think that there are other ways to approach conflict between nations, and even potentially when a nation is being incredibly unjust to people within their borders or outside of their borders. And I don't think war would be the most effective method of doing that. of relieving that conflict.
All right. Excellent. All right. We're going to start with Ethan on this one. Universal basic income. You're muted.
Sorry. So I think universal basic income is it is a grand experiment. I don't think we know how exactly will change society when we do that. And I don't think that alone needs to make us fearful of it, but it does need to make us respect the size of that change. My big interest is that I'm generally not up with redistribution of property. And so I would like to see universal basic income tried, if it's tried at all, in a voluntary basis. And that can be hard to get to. I do think that ultimately the answer lies in a currency. I think that people would be interested in voluntarily adopting a currency that gave everyone some of itself on a regular basis. And I do think there are economic benefits to that. I think that just the flow of money in an economy is certainly an area where you can run into economic trouble. And yet, other than redistribution through taxation and programs, we don't have a way to really affect that. The Fed does some things, but not at the individual level. And so I'm interested in some of the power that comes from having a UBI as an option, but I'm very leery of how we get there. And I don't think it should be through taxation or redistribution.
Okay. Peter.
I'm hugely in favor. I do think that, like you said, Ethan, it's an experiment, but I think I have two real reasons for being in favor. I think we're headed there anyway. I think automation is going to force us there, or we can do it voluntarily ahead of that. And so because of that, I think we have an opportunity to be the first nation to do so. And I have a vested interest in America staying relatively near the top of the food chain. And I think one thing it could give us the opportunity to do is have a lot more minds working to solve problems. I wonder how many people that have been brilliant have not had the opportunity to solve problems because they've been so stuck in just trying to pay current bills. So there are problems with it. There are questions that I have around how it would be implemented, how you keep people from raising rent and things like that, that I don't have answers to, but I'm a big fan.
Yeah, so I'm definitely leery of UBI. To me, it seems like it would just create a whole shift in the floor and may not create much of a difference in the actual living conditions of the average person. I wonder, while there may be a few people that would benefit, have more time to explore ideas and that kind of thing, seems like a significant other portion of the society would end up just playing video games for hours and hours and hours and on end, because they may not have the motivation to do what they need to earn a living. Which is an interesting thing because, and this is one of the things I hope we get to fairly soon, is the ideas of motivation. What motivates people? I don't love the reality that people are motivated by need to earn their living or fulfill their basic needs. But that is one of the motivations. I think there's higher ways of motivating people, but that's certainly one of them. And I think is probably fairly important one as well.
All right. I think that
I have a question of order. Is it fun being so wrong, Chad?
that's a one sentence answer. So I'll allow it. So I'm excited to see the experiment of UBI play out in some place that's not Alaska. I think it's safe to say that using Alaska as our example of the experiment working doesn't really make sense for the general population at large. And I think that it would make more sense, or a small pocket of, I think, Oakland or San Francisco that tried it. I think it would make sense to try it on a larger scale. And I would support even a city or a smaller body of government using a consumption tax to try that. I would be willing to support that. I do think with very little information, because there's not really a lot of, it's all guesswork at this point in theory, that we would see issues like we see surrounding things like minimum wage, where we have we either have a system that's developed for one purpose that is adapted to fit a different purpose 2-3 generations down the road from us, and then the system not being able to either mature to support its new purpose, or it just becomes a point of conflict. So if $1,000 a month is fine now, are we adjusting for inflation? Is it based on some sort of specific logic that can't be overturned by a political process and by the debates that surround pretty much every decision we make moving forward? So I think that from a logistics perspective, it kind of eliminates itself as being an effective option. So that's, and I'm just scoring us, by the way, on my little marker board to see what we're more in disagreement about, so that we can pick topics in the future.
Oh, I thought you were scoring us about how many redundant words we said. I failed on that round.
Oh, I thought it was who won the argument, and I definitely.
Yes, Peter won, the rest of us nothing. Peter, hitting you up first, abortion.
I am not in favor of the act and in favor of the right to do so. I think it's a horrific decision to have to make. But I'm very aware that I think there are circumstances that make it a very necessary thing to do.
Chad?
Yeah, I am in favor of the right to choose. I do recognize that it's a really difficult decision for any woman to make. And the best place for that decision in my mind is between that woman and her doctor, as long as it is inside the bounds of the age of viability. I at the same time want to do whatever we can as society to decrease a woman's need to feel like they need to go through with an abortion, so that it becomes less common.
I was trying to decide whether I should give a one-sentence answer and then pass the baton to Ethan, but I think I'll respect you guys a little more than that. I firmly disagree with both the act and the legalization of the act in almost all cases. That may be where I depart from traditional libertarians in some way, but I believe that the unborn child's rights are just as important as my rights. I think that there's significant conversation that needs to take place surrounding what is an acceptable use case for abortion, but that's for another conversation. Ethan.
I think that it is a very reasonable moral question, and that everyone should get to participate. Everybody should be able to talk. Everybody's ideas should be listened to, male or female, young or old. Having had to do that, not having had to do that, because to me it comes down to personhood and to dependence as well. The dependence of one organism on another, and these are philosophical differences. You can come up with different answers to personhood question. You can assign slightly different rights to persons, and you can give a different response when one organism is dependent on another. I guess what I most want to say is I kind of deplore the state of the conversation. I don't feel like much can get done if everybody's invited, because the two, at least two sides are very, very set in their ways. And almost like guns, somebody doesn't feel like they can give an inch without the other side trying to take a mile and running off and saying, I got a mile. And I don't think you can have a discussion about abortion on those terms. So I'm interested to discuss it with anybody that thinks it's a good question. And that good people can give different answers to it.
Wait.
I'm pro-choice.
Okay, I was gonna say went through all of that and I wasn't sure where you were at. So, okay.
That was lovely, but
But Ethan, what I respect about that, and this is breaking my own rule, but you actually you gave credibility of the conversation before actually stating your position in the conversation, which was a very mature way to approach that. And so okay,
I just want to state that I am very disappointed that no one quoted Dave Chappelle.
Well, my mom's going to watch this, so we're not going to go Dave Chappelle. Let's lighten things up a little bit. Chad, starting with you. What is your take on the 2020? What are your predictions of the 2020 election? And if you want to, what are you supporting in the 2020 election?
Oh, good Lord, Brett. I think it is going to be a disaster. I think we're headed into the most, dare I say, evil election season. Probably, on both sides. Just the amount of mud that will be slung is, in my mind, kind of disappointing to see America go down this route. I think if Biden maintains his, position as the Democratic nominee, I think he will get destroyed. And my hope is that Democrats will see the light and somehow nominate somebody else. I don't know who that person would be, but I think Biden will get destroyed.
But Biden just told a third of the country they have to vote for him based on the color of their skin.
Yes, exactly.
So, yeah, no, I think there's actually a lot riding on Biden's running mate right now. I think Biden is still a viable candidate if the DNC rather makes a responsible choice for his running mate. And I don't think they're going to do that. I could say with confidence that if Biden chose Tulsi Gabbard as his running mate, he'd win the election. Just speaking to the always Trumpers that I know very well, and how they have even admitted that they would vote for Joe Biden if Tulsi Gabbard was his running mate, because they're confident that Biden's not going to make it through 4 years with his sanity or his health intact. And so I think it will be very interesting to see who gets named as his running mate, who he's told, this is your friend, Joe, this is your friend, and then is led into his room. So I would say that it's going to be kind of a disaster. I predict we're going to have Trump for 4 more years. And I think that's why it's important that we make decisions that reduce the impact of a poor performing executive branch at a federal level as much as possible. Ethan Pooley.
I like Chad, and geared up for just a disastrous election year. These two candidates, my God. We are watching, we are chained to 2 dysfunctional political parties in a dysfunctioning nation with dysfunctional legislatures and increasingly dysfunctional courts. That's not going off the skids too fast, but it's starting. It's unraveling here and there, and the appointments from Trump have hardly helped. And none of the people should be anywhere near this office. None of the people that are running should be anywhere near the office. At least 4 years ago with Hillary Clinton, we were given a choice of status quo. Not really very liberal, but sort of the devil, hey, we could keep doing the same things and talk about a lot of stuff and not see much change. And in the face of Trump and kind of, insanity and an unraveling party at that time, I went, yay, status quo. I wasn't forced to vote that way because I'm in a state that doesn't matter because of our next topic, or one of our next topics, the Electoral College. But but this year, so I feel like 4 years ago, one of the parties just went completely off the rails, and this year we watched another one do it, and I just depressed about where that leaves us. I've never felt more disenfranchised.
I want to ask, who did you vote for in the last election? You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I have a feeling we have the same answer.
Gary Johnson.
Yeah, same. I was in California at the time.
Same.
I want 5% third party.
Yeah, I
We all
live in
voted for Gary
California. It
Johnson?
didn't matter.
No, but it did matter because if we got it 5% for Gary Johnson, we had a third party in the debates.
Well,
That is the reason. It
yeah,
wasn't.
that was why I voted
It
for
was not because I liked how he said Aleppo.
it.
Sorry, were you done, Ethan? All right. My only hope in this is that the joke that is the two-party system is being shown by the candidates that are being put forth. If we can see the joke and get rid of it, then maybe we all win. But man, I'm really disheartened that Biden is running against Trump. I would love it if Tulsi Gabbard were the VP nominee. That's not going to happen. I think, they're now talking about Elizabeth Warren, which doesn't help electoral math whatsoever. And so I can't fathom what they're thinking. So I think, as you said, Brett, he's going to get somebody foisted upon him that's not going to help him win. Trump's going to win, and it's going to be a disaster.
All right. I thought we
I'm
were
happy.
going to
that
lighten
somber
things up a
note.
little bit. Oh, man. All right. I feel like we should take a quick commercial break before we come to guns, but
Turn on some Dave Chappelle for your mom.
I just happened to set this up. I don't know how, so that I got to speak first with guns, and
And I get to speak last.
yeah, that's right. I don't think it's any secret, at least for Chad and Peter, but I do love some guns, and I enjoy even here in California, where the gun laws are so confusing and ridiculous, that I've stood at the counter of firearms stores next to active police officers who are trying to understand the laws that they're being forced to enforce. And it's a little bit ridiculous. So that's kind of one reason that I'm very, very pro firearm and anti firearm legislation. I think, like Ethan said, that it's not really a debate that we can have intelligently as a country, because it is too emotionally driven on both sides to be able to have an intelligent conversation about both the utility and the danger of firearms. But I believe that responsible gun ownership is a duty for American citizens. Not all American citizens, but American citizens who believe that they can responsibly own and operate a firearm. And I believe that the laws that we've created already surrounding guns are either not enforced at a fair level, or not understood by the general public at large, and so they are useless. And if we want to have conversations about building responsible firearm legislation that isn't based on fear, confusion, and ignorance, then I'm happy to have those conversations and to judge each piece of legislation on its merits. But that's not happening. It hasn't happened, and it's just made it harder for the right people to get guns while letting the wrong people continue to get guns at the same rate they were beforehand. Ethan.
Question of opinion. Yes or no answer. Favor or not in favor? Where do you come down on background checks?
I am in favor. I'm in favor of background checks, or rather, I'm not opposed to background checks. I can tell you that when I get background checked, get flagged, and
well, clearly, look at you.
and I don't know why, but when I have a background check done, I get flagged, and they have to do a deeper check on me.
White man from Jellicoe, Tennessee, that grew up in Guam and knew Carrie Hand and Peter and Alex Vercio.
Yeah, no, I want to say it doesn't have anything to do with anything that happened in high school. Like us wanting to be Navy SEALs so badly that we just crawled around in the bushes like for all night for no reason. But I do see that there's both merit but also a flaw in the existing background check system. And so again, like while I'm not opposed to background checks, it it flags on somebody like me who has every right to own a firearm responsibly. And so that flaw makes me a little leery of ramping up that background check. Ethan.
Okay. I believe that people have a natural right to defend themselves. I don't believe that maybe ever, but in many cases that the existence of a police force that might show up in time or might not is enough that we can say nobody gets to have a gun because we've got this taken care of for you. I think in principle, that sort of argument could be made, but I don't think we're anywhere near being able to make it with what we can actually put on the ground in support of people. The gun is, in the perfect situation, the great equalizer. And it's let's say negative externalities. The deaths that we get of innocent people when we allow a nation to buy however many guns it wants is comparable. And I've run the numbers, and when we dig into it, maybe we'll run them together. It's comparable to how many innocent bystanders die every year from alcohol consumption, which is less necessary. We maybe enjoy it more than our guns, but there is no fundamental right implicated, such as the defense of someone's body and property and so forth. And so if we can have legal alcohol and lose, I think it's somewhere on the order of 20,000 innocent people a year to the side effects of that, then we can have all the guns we want and lose 15 or 20,000 people a year to the side effects of that, and only come down hard on the people that actually end up being responsible for some of those deaths. And the larger ecosystem we accept. I think that's a good analogy that will hold as we maybe look into it more in the future and dig up some numbers. And there's a lot, like Bret, I'm very open to reason. I think we can get those deaths down a lot if we can have good, effective gun control. And one of the reasons we can't have good, effective gun control is because, contrary to what people on the anti-gun side like to say, there are a lot of people in their ranks that would like an America with no guns. And as long as those people are there and active and we hear them and talk to them a lot, the pro-gun side isn't going to give anything up. And they're going to keep supporting organizations like the NRA, which are not, they're highly captured and not very helpful to constructive conversation. So I'd like to see us be in a better place, but I think the place we need to be is one that allows everybody who wants one and hasn't proven themselves incapable to have a gun.
Pistol Pete, what do you got?
The debate around gun drives me insane. I think there are people like that, Ethan, but I would say
So that's how it happened.
I think the NRA is much larger, even at only 4 million members, than the amount of people that want to take away all guns. And the amount of power that organization holds is insanity to me. That being said, I think I'd come down to a pretty similar place, which also drives me insane. I am okay. Most of the gun legislation put forward by the left seems more an attempt to get people riled up than something trying to implement any actual change, like stocks and stuff like that. Like I have not read anything that makes me think that those are going to actually change gun deaths. So I think I'm in a pretty similar place. I'm in favor of background checks. About 97%. There's a small part of me that thinks that felons should be given another chance, much like they should be given another chance to vote. So I guess that my answer is as confusing as I am confused by this issue, but I'd be in favor of people with background checks being allowed to get common sense firearms.
I deeply respect confused positions on guns.
I would kind of describe my position as more conflicted than confused. Bret and I have been having this conversation for years now and been intending to actually hold a lengthy conversation on this I, in general, am in favor in some form of gun control, although probably more limited than many of the people that you're describing, Ethan. I think, to me, and Brett and I have talked about this, the biggest problem with gun violence in America is not necessarily the guns that are available, but our narratives about guns. And even our conversation here illustrates a bit about that narrative. So if you went back 50 years in the past, where guns were fairly widespread in rural areas, the narrative about guns was very different from just self-defense. And that's, I think, the only way we view guns now is in terms of self-defense, which contributes to gun violence, in my view. I'll leave it there.
I'm going to solve this one for us. Let's get rid of news stations and lobbyists, and we don't have a gun problem.
Oh,
Sorry, so get rid of free speech and then we can have the guns? Is that your position?
Amendment 1 is out of here.
I said get rid of the news stations that make very popular the people that shoot up schools and blast their names and faces across the nation.
I agree with 9/10 of that statement. This
This is going to be a good one for us to go into.
I really do. And honestly, what I'd like, and I've said this before, Chad, I would love for us to go shooting together as a group and then go to breakfast and have a conversation about guns.
How are we going to do that over Zoom?
We'll figure it out.
Well, this laptop is expensive. I don't think I want to.
Ethan, Ethan and Peter will fly you out, and then you'll have to
get our viewership up, Brett, to where we can
That's right.
afford that.
You guys go shoot a gun, then Ethan and I will shoot bottle rockets at you guys, and then we'll have breakfast and have a discussion.
Sounds like we need
We won't be able to go to breakfast because we supported the lockdown last week. So
That's right.
True.
Hey man, I can go to breakfast. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to put question marks next to that one since we all agree and none of us agree. Ethan, you're up. Immigration.
Who's up?
Ethan.
immigration. I love immigration. I think we should have lots of it. I think it makes our space better. Remember, I want a government that prides itself on containing multiple societies that are different and that don't agree and that don't cooperate except in the market. They don't see the same solution in money issues and healthcare issues and how to educate their kids or anything. And we all get along fine and we're all peaceful with each other because we're all allowed enough space and responsibility and consequences to build our own lives. I don't like Team America, so to speak. I don't want to be on your guys' team. I want a respectful coexistence. And I think on the justice of immigration, I think most nations cannot justify stopping it. Most nations don't own most of their land. They have the right to control it for military space and things like that. But I don't believe that if a person is not using land, they can tell someone else that they can't. And I don't believe that nations have rights that they didn't get from their people. I believe that nations only have powers that are delegated to them. So if I can't tell someone from Mexico that they can't use some BLM land somewhere because I'm not using it, then the nation can't tell them they can't use some BLM land somewhere. And they can go there and they can make it, they can treat it like the Mormons treated Utah. And they can basically create value out of land. And their passport is peacefulness. If they come here and they don't stomp on other people's property and they don't, engage in force and fraud, then we don't have any right to tell them they can't be here in our country.
Right. Peter.
I love what you just said about their passport is peace. I love that.
Yeah, that is very good.
You guys smoke so much pot. I swear.
Wait, I played the.
Immigration.
Are you passing?
No, I was joking about the pot thing. Since his mother, who watched me since I was a boy, watches this. It was a joke, Chad. Try one sometime. Man, yeah, I don't know that I can disagree with that. I think like borders are arbitrary lines that we started drawing in the last 100 to 200 years, depending on where in the world you are. And I think one of the things that has made America really great is, and one of the greatest countries in the world is, we have had differing opinions, and we've had different points of view, and we've had people come in and start businesses that have made our world so much better based on ideas they brought from their homelands. It's brought other languages. It's brought modes of education. I think we're really pushing ourselves towards the fall of the Roman Empire by saying, this is us, everybody else stay out. I think our greatness comes from ideas, and ideas that are brought in from other places. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree that our what makes our nation great is its diversity, and that's diversity in, ideas, that's diversity in experience, that's diversity in worldview, that's diversity in food, things, everything. And you don't get that without immigration. And I think what this question was really aimed at was, quotes, illegal immigration or undocumented immigrants. And I think that when we treat Central America as it deserves to be treated, because we haven't treated Central America very well over the last 60 years, then we might have a reasonable stance of having more, quotes, conservative immigration policy. And the
Yeah, but then we wouldn't need it.
right, we probably wouldn't need it, right? That would effectively decrease the really decrease the flow of immigration, because there would be countries that were stable, they were just, people could earn their living and be safe, and we have really destabilized all of those countries for a very long time. So I think what I would like us to see is relax a lot of the rules around immigration. I think as we've tightened our borders, that has actually increased the likelihood of people to stay here, because they feel like if they do leave, they're not able to come back. And so you get more people staying within the country instead of going back and forth. So yeah, that's probably as much as I want to say on that topic right now.
I married a Canadian, or Canadian American. She was actually born in the States. She say what?
Sneak her through a tunnel, or?
Yeah, she hid inside of the back of a truck and came down from Ontario. And she was actually born in California. She has dual citizenship. She spent the first half of her life in Ontario and the second half of her life here. But she speaks about in Ontario. She speaks about the Canadian view of culture in a similar way to what Peter and Ethan, you guys kind of mentioned. They don't say melting pot in Canada. They say a rich cultural tapestry. And I think that's important, because it instead of everybody conforms to some central idea of American, which I believe that you can do and still retain a cultural identity. I mean, I know plenty of proud Irish people who are Americans, but they're also very proud about being Irish. It's just kind of the way people tend to congregate along the lines of identity, regardless of the color of your skin. I believe that if we were, I believe that we need to completely restructure our immigration in this country, the laws surrounding immigration. If we're going to have laws, then they need to be just laws, and they need to be fair laws. But when we talk about immigration, it's really like a prism that scatters light from all of these different issues. Poverty, education, access to resources, crime, all of these different topics that we don't really like to talk about. We just like to talk about how one of those groups of people is affecting a specific area in a positive or negative way. But really, we're creating opportunities for people to be taken advantage of. And if we have a specific, and I'll just use labor law as an example, if we have specific labor laws that apply to a group of people, and we're allowing businesses to exploit other groups of people to avoid having to follow labor laws, then we have 17 issues all tied up into what we're calling immigration. And so I think that as a nation that can't seem to wrap its mind around simplifying the legal code in general, we are never going to solve the immigration issue unless we just open the doors. Now, I think that we could, as a nation, find a lot of success in rehabilitating central and close to South America that we've spent so much time destabilizing, but we're going to have to pull resources from all around the world. And I see that as actually useful. I see the damage that we can fix on our doorstep as more important than the damage that we can fix, thousands of miles away. And if I were president tomorrow, that's where I would be prioritizing our State Department and our government's resources to help and rebuild economies that we've devastated, or that economies that have devastated themselves. I mean, we certainly have played a large role in destabilizing Central and South America. Our war on drugs has done just as much damage as our war on communism. And so, again, so many different issues that are wrapped up in this thing called immigration, that if we pull at one of those threads, I think the whole thing's going to come unraveled, and maybe that's what it's going to take.
I did intend to make one comment about the legal processes for immigration. And it seemed like our laws for immigration, while they might be complex, are generally actually reasonably just. We just don't follow them. So we don't actually follow what our laws are. And then that leads to further injustice.
I disagree with that. Our laws are built to allow what in the 1900s was white immigrants from Western Europe in. And you and I were not a part of that, being Italian. It was harder for Italians to get in than, say, Germans.
No, but the application for asylum and those kinds of things are generally legal. Now, there's obviously some differences in the way that we approach. In other words, if you were from Cuba, because you came by water, you're good. But if you come from Mexico, that's not okay. So
I think we have a great topic of conversation that we can pull into a future episode.
All right.
Ethan, that being said, everybody else get a shot. You had something you wanted to say?
I lost it in my fascination for where things went there. What I said right when you stopped talking was I love that answer. I thought it was excellent. And the economics of immigration are something I would love to have a deep dive on. There's a great David Brooks, isn't that the somewhat conservative columnist for one of these newspapers? He wrote something back in in 2008, before Trump had blown the immigration thing up. He wrote it back in the economic downturn. It was called the Open Door Bailout. And it was about the economic benefits of throwing the doors open and probably dropping the minimum wage and saying, hey, poor people, come in, be poor here, get rich here, send your kids to school here, buy cars here, buy houses here, build houses here, and bail out our economy. And I think that's what would happen. So we should go there.
I love that.
I think David Brooks was one of W. Bush's main speechwriters, if I'm not mistaken. All right. Ethan, we're going to you on...
You
no.
went to Ethan in the last one.
Okay, Peter, we're going to you on the Electoral College.
Ethan's got his ears plugged.
There's so much stupidity to it, and yet it also protects us from other stupidity.
Government. Stupidity protecting us from other stupidity.
I
like that description.
You need each branch of government to protect you from all the other branches.
That's exactly right.
Exactly.
That's not even a parody either. That's what's sad. That's not a parody. That's what they're for.
Yeah.
It's true. Here's what I will say about the Electoral College. I don't have a good answer whether we should keep it or not. I think it does protect things that are important. I'm pissed at liberals for going, it didn't go in our favor, so we should get rid of it now. That pisses me off, because I think we have to look at the ramifications of things on the whole as a nation. So we were, I was not. Lots of liberals were totally fine when Obama was grabbing executive privilege like nobody's business. And then when Trump does the same thing, they're really mad about it. Like, we didn't see that coming. We have to stop looking at things only from the angle of if it helps someone in power that we like. That's my rant on the Electoral College.
Right.
I'll agree with you on the Electoral College and liberals, but I will say that Obama issued less executive directives than previous presidents. But
executive privilege is not executive orders. Those are
sorry, that's what I meant. Executive orders. Is that what I meant? Was it executive?
He
orders?
also was the worst on freedom of the press since Nixon. So
that's according to who. So what I was going to say about the Electoral College is I don't know whether it should continue to exist or not either. I think it is non-functional. If it was functional, it would have prevented Trump from reaching office. I mean, you had somebody who was clearly unqualified in nearly every sense from being president. And if the Electoral College was to step in at any point, that would have been the point to step in. And obviously it didn't. And I understand why. I'm not going to blame.
That would be a coup. That's not what the Electoral is not here to pull coups on our country.
I am saying if it was to act functionally at any point, that's what it would do. And I don't think I could see why it wouldn't, because it would be viewed as a coup.
No, it is a coup. That's a coup. You won. Let's get over it.
How is it a coup when they're literally given that power by the Constitution?
Exactly. It's not a coup. I can see why the right would have viewed it as a coup, but I don't think it is a coup. That's exactly what it was designed for. And clearly it couldn't do that. And I understand why, so I'm not going to blame the Electoral College for the way they voted. But in my view, that was the time for them to step in. And so I don't see it as functional. It exists to allow certain states to give them more power in the election process, and probably more power than they deserve. So if anything, I think we should reshuffle the Electoral College as far as how much each state gets, just because you have.
Should you then reshuffle the Senate, because that's what it's based on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have any clear good answers. I mean, I think that we're not going to do away with it, or we're not going to change it without doing away with it, and I'm not sure that that's a good idea. So.
Well, I kind of straddle the issue. I believe the Electoral College is kind of the greatest challenge to the rise of a third party system in at least contemporary America. I mean, historically, Republicans and Democrats have not been the only two parties, but I feel like it does keep people from voting from a third party candidate. Here in California, people are saying, if I vote for so and so, then it's not going to count anyways. It's not going to matter anyways, so I'm just not going to show up and vote. But I do think that if we were to make any changes to the Electoral College, it needs to be through an amendment to the Constitution, and not through any of the other backdoor, supposedly constitutional, potentially legal, debatably responsible approaches that have come up since 2016. With something as significant as the way we choose the President of the United States, I believe that deserves nothing less than an amendment to our Constitution stating specifics. I don't think we're ever going to get that, and so I think we're going to be dancing with the one that we brung for until this great experiment of ours either perfects itself or dissolves into chaos.
Will there ever be another constitutional amendment in the United States of America?
I don't think
that
so.
would be a fun question to ask.
There's only one, isn't there? The second.
Amen. Yeah. All right. I watched a really
Go
I
ahead.
watched a really interesting exchange on the Federalist Papers yesterday from two very right-wing individuals, but it was a great explanation of the Federalist Papers that helped me better understand the significance of the amendment process. Anyway, so I would say, like, I personally feel that there's an argument to be made on either side of one vote, one person, one vote, or the Electoral College representing those in the quote flyover states that nobody apparently tends to care about for some reason. And yet I do believe that it should be done in a much more binding format than we've talked about, at least since 2016.
I have no problems with the Electoral College. I do think it failed us. I think it's designed to potentially protect us from a president as bad as Trump, and it did fail to do that this time. I don't think that means it will never succeed, but it's a real last-ditch effort to get out of a really bad person by that last-minute thing. And I think we do have to ask the question, like, if that's ever what saved us from somebody, would the cure be worse than the disease? Because it could do exactly, people would think of it exactly how Peter seems to think of it. I have no problems with the mathematical approach that it takes, though. I don't think that what it did, like we did with Congress, like we did with the Senate versus the House, we divided the representational impact of the citizens and the states. And we said that the president is the people's president and he's the state's president. And if these states are going to be significantly distinct political entities, then they have a right to representation qua state, and not just because they contain some of America's citizens. And so they got that representation in the Senate. And when it comes to really tiny states, in the way we run intentionally run our national elections, that turns out to matter a lot. I think we should keep it that way, or something like that. Geographic representation is not the only representation that matters, but it doesn't matter zero compared to per capita representation. I do think there has been one approach suggested that can kind of wipe it away without violating the Constitution, and that's when a bunch of states enter into a multi-state pact to always vote for the popular winner. But that's a voluntary approach, and if it can be done by a state legislature, it can be undone by a state legislature. So maybe that gets past your objections, Brad. I'm not sure, but I think the crux of the issue here is about democracy. And does the Electoral College mean we're not a democracy? And do we want to be a democracy? And I think the Electoral College means that the United States of America is not a pure democracy. We should have already known that from our history books. And should we want a pure democracy? I say no. And because democracies don't necessarily produce justice either. And what I really want is a just government. So I think that's a deep discussion on its own. But do I think a pure democracy is the answer on the march towards justice? Absolutely not.
I just want to jump in there. I agree. I think the point of the Electoral College is to protect the nation as a whole from the mediocrity of the majority. But I don't see, I guess I struggle, like, as in this election in particular, Trump's disciples would have, I think we would have had armed revolt. And so.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree with you. That's why the Electoral College didn't, if anybody wanted to step in, that's why they didn't, is because they knew it would have been perceived as a coup. I do think that they have the power to do that. That was what it was intended for.
It was one of the things. The other was just to carry out the math. I mean, they didn't have spreadsheets, right? Mm-hmm. And not that they can't tally, but this was a manifestation of the counting system that they were going to use. It was people standing in these roles, and it matched the Senate and the House and so forth. And that's, I would say, is its main purpose. And one of its potential secondary functions is, as they discussed in the Federalist Papers, to protect us from someone who's unfit.
They just didn't foresee our Lord and Savior Donald Trump running for president. So
That's going to be the clip that people play when you run for Congress, Peter.
It's just going to be that again. Our Lord and Savior, Donald. Our Lord and Savior,
Yeah,
Donald.
that's right. That's going to be in every competitor's campaign video. That's
We are just tonight. We just unfit ourselves for all offices.
not just tonight, man. Not just tonight. Chad.
When Ethan, just to give you a 10-second story, when Bret and I were like 16, Osama bin Laden threatened to bomb Guam somehow, which we don't know.
Yeah.
Bret and I had backpacks to run into the hills somehow. We lived on an island that was 212 square miles and somehow thought we were smart enough to have backpacks to run away. We were never fit for Congress.
Got it.
Thank you, Bret.
I
remember that period of your lives, by the way.
Hey, we showed how sneaky we were and how fit for Red Dawn we were by taking everything out of Joe's room when he was asleep one night.
I still kind of have the backpack, Peter, so that's all right.
I hope you've added a few things since then.
Yes.
I'm glad I live in a different state than all you guys.
Hey man, I'm a Gonzaga graduate. I'm headed to Spokane next.
You're gonna overfly even my buffer state. Oh man.
All right, Chad. And I'm going to use the term that I'm familiar with. So correct my term if it's incorrect. We're going to say non-traditional marriage.
Okay, so in favor of non-traditional marriage, depending on how broad people might mean that term. Not in favor of marriage to cars, marriage to animals, marriage to whatever. I don't think anybody would
slope, man. It's a slope.
I don't think anybody would take it that far, but I just wanted to. So I'm not sure exactly how broad people meant that term.
Well, yeah, and I mean, so you're pro same-sex marriage.
Yes, pro same-sex marriage, totally. Despite my religious background.
Yeah. The only reason, here's the campaign snippet that's going to be used against me. The only reason why I am not for same-sex marriage is because I'm not for a marriage as a process that my government is involved with in any way. I believe that any couple of consenting age that wants to enter into a relationship of permanence should be able to do so. But having been married and divorced and married again, I've had some experience in the matter, and I can say that in our current society, there are more arguments that I can make against the state's involvement in marriage than I believe would be for the state's involvement of marriage. So.
I would give a similar answer. I mean, I'm not opposed to letting any consenting adults live their life and form the relationships they want to form. I think the state could very harmlessly define marriage and everything if there weren't a bunch of repercussions tied to that, or if we were highly homogenous and this almost applied to no one else, right? But that's not where we are, and Christian Americans want the state's role in marriage to do religious work for them. They want it to be a stamp of approval, and everything else is unofficial and grody or whatever. And the minute that becomes an issue, I say, okay, if we can't agree on this term, nobody gets it. So I'm going to come take the term marriage out of everybody's hands when it comes to the state. I'm going to go, I guess only your church can handle this now. Judges, put it down. Step away slowly from the word marriage. And we call it whatever. We've already got civil unions, but you can call it Flumboff. I don't care. You're making you're opting into a certain legal relationship, certain property relationship. And that's all there is to it. And how could we stop people from doing that? And for me, that includes polygamy and I forget the broader term, but multiple marriage.
Oh, yeah.
Not that I think we should allow them necessarily in the way that we've seen them. I've seen a lot of proposals for there being like a primary spouse, but also additional spouses in ways. There are rights to be protected, rights of individuals, and multiple marriages can be highly exploitative and so forth. And I think the state should care about that stuff a lot. But what it should not do is have an A list of relationships that are allowed. And then if you're not on the list, well, then you just don't get to do that. And to me, that goes to the heart of the legitimacy of the state. If it's not going to recognize relationships that people have every right to carry out and help enforce the pain points and so forth, then it actually loses its legitimacy over those people and those relationships. If you're in for a penny as a government, you're in for a pound. You have to administer all of these pain points in life.
Peter.
I mean, I think it's, well, I am clearly in favor of it. I agree with everything I think that everyone has said. Yeah, like if the government has no role in it, but if they have been brought into it, I don't see that changing. I want to get real close when I say this. We are not a Christian nation, so we should not hold our marriage beliefs up to Christian ideals, so that anyone should be allowed to get married. I agree with you, Ethan. I think, why is polygamy illegal? I don't think that the state should have a horse in the race of who's marrying whom, as long as, like you say, there aren't power things like somebody's 12 marrying somebody who's 30, or other ways that people can be exploited.
Which is more acceptable in a lot of states still than we'd like to imagine or we'd like to believe. So
yeah, marrying a 12-year-old is more accepted than marrying a guy. Yeah.
All right. Universal health care. Oh, I guess we're at me again, right? Universal health care. So I work in healthcare. I have a vested interest in seeing the business of healthcare succeed, however that looks. I don't believe that at a federal level, we are ready to take on something as complex and nuanced as healthcare. I think that there are reasons why it works in a lot of areas. Mostly that's because it's always been a part, or it's been a part of those cultures for so long that it's had the time to kind of improve as its citizenry has grown. But we currently are looking at the somewhat limited changes that the federal government made to healthcare in the Obama administration and since, and the impact that that's had on the business of healthcare, I think, has been quite substantial. I think that there are, I think just looking at the small example of digital health as it's evolved over the COVID period, we are now employing tools that are making our waiting rooms safer and are allowing us, and Chad, I'm just going to speak as an expert here, that are allowing us to connect to our patient population in a lot of ways and in a very appropriate format that up until this point has been limited in a lot of examples by the federal involvement in healthcare because they don't understand the technology or they don't appreciate or respect the technology. Access to that technology has been limited. And so I think that as far as instituting some sort of universal healthcare system, we would disrupt the economy, number one, to such a grand scale that it would be almost impossible to recover. And number two, I think that we would find ourselves in some of the same spaces that some of our partner countries in Canada and in Great Britain. They have great healthcare for 85% of the population. And that's great. We need to figure out how to have great healthcare for 100% of the population without disrupting 100% of the economy. Ethan Pooley.
As a result, of course, I'd love healthcare to be universally available to people. This really comes up against fundamental positions for me. I don't think people have positive duties towards one another. I think they have only negative duties. So I don't think anyone owes anyone else anything. And I'm against most redistribution for that reason. And I don't think that anyone owes me healthcare, and I don't think I owe anyone else healthcare. So I am against what almost everybody means when they talk about universal healthcare. Forcing people to pay for their own insurance is kind of a much lesser evil, and I think, Brett, it can carry some answers to your concerns, because we can have a market system that essentially just everyone's forced to participate in. But a lot of the repercussions of markets and stuff can still have play if we let the chips land, fall where they may. And we have a hard time doing that in our society. If we can give somebody money to go buy a solution, but then if they don't choose to buy it or it doesn't work, we still want to show up and give them the solution. And the other reason I'm opposed to universal healthcare is because most of the formulations of it go in the opposite direction that I want to see healthcare go, which is the dismantling of all barriers to the provision and access to healthcare. Physician licensure, drug prescriptions, equipment regulation. I want to see the state take an advisory role, a certification role, and say, we like this Chad guy. He's great. You should go to Chad. And I go, I like this Peter guy. He's got some new ideas. And the state goes, it's okay.
It's your money. Spend it where you want.
Yeah. And we would not love all the outcomes from that. But to me, that is freedom. And it's freedom about one of the most crucial things, which is how to maintain your own body. And paternalism does not play with me there at all. And we came up with the, Peter, I think, suggested the topic of drugs. I think it's very ironic that we talk about legalizing recreational drugs when we haven't legalized medicinal drugs. I need Chad's permission to take drugs that are good for my body. And we're talking about how I can go use drugs that will screw me up, and we want to legalize those. I think
so, Ethan, are you saying you need some hydroxychloroquine?
You got me, right?
I mean, you would if you had lupus, or if you had malaria, or if you had many of the other things that drug can cure or treat. Oh, and we lost him. All right, well, I guess we had a touchy subject. I'm glad he was able to get what he needed to get out. Peter, why don't you jump in and share?
Many of the drugs that you're talking about, Ethan, may help you in one situation, but are much more harmful for you in most situations than recreational drugs would be.
Sure.
So I will add that caveat. When it comes to healthcare, I can't say that I know enough to know the outcomes either way. I think that outcomes that I would like to see I would like to see as many people with access to healthcare as possible. If that could be 100% of our country, like you said, Brett, that would be great. Within that, I do want to see freedom to see whichever doctor you want. I'd like to see a limitation of the power of the pharmaceutical companies. That's all I can come up with right now. But yeah, I can't say that I know enough in this realm to be able to say I see an outcome. So yes, I'm in favor of or against universal healthcare.
Okay, so I am generally in favor of socialized medicine, although I would like to see maintenance of a private payer system or a commercial payer system. From my understanding, that's a bit what Australia has. I want to show really quickly our healthcare outcomes. Oh shoot, Brett, you've disabled me from screen sharing.
Well, that.
When I gave my opinion on healthcare, I got kicked off the call by accident. So maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah,
we thought your mic drop.
You completed your thought and you were like, Ethan, out. Chad, go ahead. I think you should be able to share now.
Okay, so I want to show this slide, which looks at the U.S. outcomes compared to several other first world nations, and it shows that we are very close to the bottom in those compared to those other nations in multiple different respects. And so I just wanted to point that out. But probably to me, the more important slide, this was actually a presentation on healthcare value that I presented, is this one. which shows that on the left, on the y-axis, you have life expectancy. On the x-axis, you have health expenditure. And our payoff for the amount of money that we spend on healthcare is fairly low. So you can see that we are far outpacing, pretty much every other country on health expenditure per person. And then our life expectancy and multiple other health outcomes don't compare, near as well. And so I feel like, we are.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
We are spending a huge amount of money with less than optimal outcomes for the amount of money that we spend. And we need to do what we can to fix that disparity, as well as aim for reasonable healthcare for all. And I think a mix of socialized and commercial payer insurance is the answer to that.
I would not have seen Chile dominating that chart, is what I wanted to say.
Did you say Chile?
Well, so Peter, that's
the country. Okay, got it. Okay,
so,
the country.
So that's the amount of money that they're spending per person. So, and then they are not dominating as far as the life expectancy.
It was still fairly high, wasn't it?
No, their life expectancy is fairly high. So their life expectancy is 1.5 years.
Life expectancy is high.
Yeah, their life expectancy is 81.5 years, whereas Japan's is 83.5. So they're not at the top end of that chart, but they are.
I think that we have enough information as this group and enough opinion, it sounds like, to carry this on into a more thoughtful hour and a half in the future. So I definitely want to have that conversation. All right. I think that was Ethan. So, no. Who started that one? Me?
You did.
I'm not sure. How many do we have left?
We have one left.
Let's get to it. Let's try to stick to 1 minute, though. We're at about an hour and a half. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Ethan, recreational drugs.
Well, I just said my intro piece for recreational drugs here. Let's talk about the ones we should actually be taking. Recreational drugs, we have found how badly prohibition works. And so at a practical level, unless we feel there's a moral necessity of stopping people from doing this, my God, the costs of prohibition, apparently we didn't, we learned it with alcohol, but we couldn't look at alcohol's next door neighbors and no, we had to go learn it there too. And we're still learning it. And the impact of stigmatization, leading people to fight these battles alone, the flushing of people into the penitentiary system, the just horrendous results on Central America. This has already come up in other places in this conversation. It's ridiculous, and I do not have I don't see a moral reason why I have to stop Chad from doing cocaine if he wants to. So unless a drug is making someone immediately and directly dangerous to the people around them, I don't think it's just to restrict people's access to it. I do think y'all should be careful, because I think that carries right over to prescription drugs, and you want to have a leg to stand on if you agree with me here. So laying down the gauntlet.
Nice.
Prescription drugs is going to be one of our conversations.
Well, I think that goes into the idea of expertise, which is one of the conversations I think we do need to have.
Well, all the experts say you shouldn't take cocaine, but are we talking about letting people do it?
But who's really
what about stuff that even what's cocaine good for, right?
I've heard that you can get a lot of work done on it. I cannot think of a program that has been more horrific for outside countries, for our country, for our prison system, cost us more than the war on drugs.
Militarization of police forces.
Militarization of police force, you name it. I mean, it's had our CIA selling drugs in LA to keep political thought down. I mean, there's nothing. I don't think there's been anything in the U.S. that has been more disastrous than the war on drugs. I think we have to be very careful how we do so. I am in favor of legalization of drugs. There are some caveats there. Meth is incredibly scary, and I think it goes to your point, Ethan, of they can't impinge on somebody else's freedom or safety. How do you do that with something like meth? Places like Portugal have said there's certain drugs that if you're going to do them, you're going to stay in this room where we allow you to do these drugs. Those are studies that are, places like Portugal are used a lot when used in this discussion. That does not mean that it's going to go in the same manner in our country. And so I think that also has to be thought through. There's dangers certainly on both sides of that. But after a lot of thought, I think the freedom and the disaster that is our current system, I'm in favor.
So I'm fairly conflicted on this topic because I do see the damage, as both of you had kind of pointed out, to the war on drugs. However, I'm in favor of legalization of marijuana.
Pointing you to my poster of Timothy Leary, Chad, so it's on my wall.
Thank you. I'm in favor of legalization of marijuana. I think other drugs pose distinct differences from the prohibition on alcohol and even marijuana, in that specifically with having kids in a home, how do you determine that those are safe or not safe for parents to engage in? So heroin, other things of that nature can significantly incapacitate a parent to care for their child. And obviously alcohol can too, but I would say that that's a lot less common. So the number needed, the number of people that need to use alcohol to have people that incapacitate or to incapacitate to take care of children is much, much higher with alcohol. You would have to have way more people using alcohol for one person to engage in that manner that they would be incapacitated to take care of kids. Whereas cocaine, heroin, meth, all those kinds of things are very different. It's I would say you're maybe not for cocaine, but with meth and heroin and those kinds of things, you are incapacitated to care for kids. So that to me is the distinction on prohibition between alcohol and marijuana and those other drugs. I think it's very interesting to me on meth. The how meth became one of the most commonly used drugs in America is that people needed, actually, as Peter was saying, to use it to work. As pay decreased for meat packing plants, manufacturing, and all of that kind of thing, people found themselves having to work 2 or 3 jobs and needed to be able to stay awake to do so. And meth was actually a great way to do that. And then obviously that led to other consequences in their lives. But I do think we should engage much more carefully with rehab and focus our efforts on rehab rather than imprisonment.
Question. Do you know of any studies or research or have any thoughts on, for instance, if somebody's going to use heroin as a parent, they're probably more likely to lay on the couch, whereas someone with alcohol may be more likely to tend towards violence? Do you see a distinction there with childcare, or do you know any studies that would talk about that?
I don't think there's any studies comparing alcohol and heroin and parenting. I don't know that there's obviously some people that are drunk do engage in violence. I don't know that that's that you can say that that's across the board and would. Sorry, what?
That's not what I'm saying, but I would guess that there is a lot more violence from people that are drinking alcohol than, for instance, people that are using heroin or smoking marijuana. Yeah,
but I think when you're talking about common, it's because more people use alcohol. I don't know that it's the number needed. I don't know that it would be the number needed or the percentage of people engaging in that activity.
Yeah, I think that would be when we have a conversation about drugs. I think it would be interesting to bring in, we'll have some time to prep and we can actually bring a little bit more research into the conversation.
I want to see if somebody says they want to put us back on the track to alcohol prohibition.
I'm
sorry, wait, I missed that. What?
I want to see one of us say they want to put us back on track towards alcohol prohibition.
Oh,
hey, Hey, there was a lot of money to be made with prohibition.
Just impale themselves on that horn of the dilemma.
Yeah.
Hey! Oh.
Hey, we had great presidential families come out of prohibition because of the money they made. So it might, we did work. We've done worse.
I've got to go put a kid to bed.
All right, so I'll close this up. So I believe that we should err on the side of legalization. I would tend to agree that we're going to see a lot of negative outcomes that will, parenting related outcomes, abuse related outcomes, crime related outcomes for the consumption of some of these stronger, quote unquote, stronger drugs. I hesitate to think that we're going to see more than we see in the involved in the illegal possession, distribution, sale. I think that we probably are going to see a lot more kids right now being victims of crime, being victims of abuse or neglect because they exist in a household where the manufacture or consumption or distribution rather of these illegal drugs exists. And so I would be more than happy, or I would say that if we do legalize, let's just say we legalize all of it, and a parent is neglecting their child because they're on heroin, then we prosecute that parent to the fullest extent of the law. If we see that happening quite extensively, then we start to rein things in then. But I would rather we err on the side of legalization and then make changes down the road. We've shown that we can do that when we just come up with new laws about what you can and can't do. So I think it's a lot harder for us to shed laws than it is for us to adopt new laws. So, all right. Well,
You have a tally for us to let us know what our next what our next topic is.
Yeah, so I think there's 4 big ones that we can look at. I'll put them up in the Facebook group, and we can vote on which one we want to do next. But they look like guns, universal health care, immigration, and drugs. I think those are 4 that we can have substantial and informed and hopefully educational conversations surrounding those.
If we do turn all those into a field trip, that'll be one for the record book.
That would be one for the record books.
I can take care of immigration and guns. Those are the 2 that I can help.
Hunter S. Thompson would be very proud of that weekend.
On abortion, I do have somebody we can invite as a guest.
Okay. Good.
So.
I think that would be a thoughtful and productive conversation.
We actually might want to invite a couple guests on that one.
All right. Well, thank you for keeping things civil. This has been the 3rd installation of the Civil Civics series. It's always wonderful talking to you guys every weekend. Have a beautiful, hopefully long weekend. And if not, enjoy the remnants of your weekend. And I'll see you next time.